third Central Valley PolitiCast. Happy to be joined by the host of The Issue Is, Alex Michelson. Alex, I guess the theme of this is the issue is at the RNC convention. What is it?
The issue is that the Republicans are unified in a major way. They were already unified before the shooting of Donald Trump, but the shooting really galvanized and turned Donald Trump into an almost, mythic messiah-like figure to a lot of people on the floor. And the contrast of that to what's happening on the Democratic side, where member after member, voter after voter wants the nominee to drop out, is stunning. We've never seen either of these things happen before. A major nominee get shot days before the convention, and such an extraordinary push to basically force the hand of the sitting president of the United States. It's unlike anything we've seen before, and it's extraordinary to witness up close in person.
It seemed like the two themes from afar were unity and uniting around a candidate, maybe for the first time we've seen at a convention under Trump, and then also strength, which of course he showed, and maybe durability too, through being able to put through that long a speech, because it was quite long.
It was long, which is not always good. Sometimes shorter is better. Yes, I mean, I think the major thing, and it was interesting, Will, to spend the week talking to delegates from not only all over California and the Central Valley, but also all over the country. And I asked almost all of them the same question, which is, why Trump for you? And the first thing that almost everybody said was, he's strong, or he's a fighter, or the other guy's weak, or we need somebody who's strong, or he's America first and he fights for America. I mean, that idea of fighting was central. So much so that the speakers on the final night is the head of the Ultimate Fighting Championship and the wrestling legend Hulk Hogan and Linda McMahon, who used to run and own WWE. So, I mean, they couldn't make it. Donald Trump doesn't really do subtle. It's not his thing. It's very clear. And clearly, fight, 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 which is what he said instinctually right after he was shot. It is incredible. And just think about that moment, Will, what that's like. I mean, the guy is shot in the ear. He's bleeding all over the place. Somebody's trying to kill him. He's down on the floor. And he, in his mind, because he is so adept as a TV producer, knows that this image is going to make him look weak. This idea that people are having to protect him like that. So his instinct, without checking with any advisor, without talking to anybody else, is get up off the floor and try to look strong, because the whole premise of the campaign is looking strong, and literally get the message in that moment, fight, 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 which was a rallying cry for the crowd. They would chant that over and over again when he was speaking, when other people were speaking. It's also interesting how many of the speakers referred to him not being killed as an act of God, and that God was protecting him. I mean, they had many different pastors go up there with that message, and Trump's own children had that message as well.
Well, you had talked about him being subtle, and I felt like that was kind of what we saw for the first. I don't even know if you can say half, maybe the first act of the speech, as far as him going and being subtle and having those moments about. And previously, I think most people thought his most subtle from that point was the most recent presidential debate. Then he goes into this. Of course, he has the firefighters' former uniform up on stage with him in that sort of a gesture. And then all of a sudden, we touched on what you had posted last night on social media, which is you had said you've been veering a little bit away from the teleprompter for the latter half of that speech.
Not a little, a lot. I mean, the speech was supposed to go like 40 minutes. It went an hour and a half. So he veered a lot away from it, because that was all just him riffing. I think he got a little bored with the teleprompter speech. He thought some of those lines weren't landing, and so he started going back to the hits. I mean, it is amazing how much he plays the crowd and feels the crowd and tries to get a sense of the crowd. And, the late, great Hannibal Lecter made a return. That wasn't in the scripted remarks. That was something that he knows gets the crowd fired up. I mean, it was interesting talking to Democrats and getting text during the speech and watching people on Twitter react to it in real time. At the beginning part of the speech, most Democratic operatives and folks on that side were kind of like, we're effed. the race is over. It's going to be crazy to see what happens in the second Trump term. And as it kept going, there was more of like, okay, maybe we can beat that guy. And for some, that sort of hardened their feeling that we need a different nominee because Joe Biden is beatable. We just need somebody who can beat him. And then, I think the White House campaign infrastructure was, this guy's beatable. We can beat him. So it sort of hardened their perspective potentially to see it.
Yeah, and last couple of questions. You just touched on this here too. I mean, it felt like this was the second half of that speech was the whole ammunition cycle, right? It was like, okay, these are the issues that we can actually maybe go and reach voters on, right? Because it felt like that's when he started to delve into policy. You started to hear more of what you would hear from him at a Trump rally as opposed to a national convention speech. And it seemed like that's what Democratic operatives are probably seizing on this morning. As you just mentioned.
I mean, it wasn't just the issues, though. It was the fact that it was meandering. It was the fact that he wasn't on script. It was the fact that it was kind of boring at certain points. It was the fact that he looked older. I mean, Donald Trump is 78. If it wasn't for Joe Biden, he would be the oldest candidate ever. And he looked a little slower. He looked a little more tired. And I would imagine anybody who just was shot that would take something out of you, too. And so I think, there is a world that if Joe Biden wasn't there, that people would be calling for him to drop out potentially, and so that's happening as well. And so I think there are some that think, okay, if Biden's out, then Donald Trump is the doddering old man. Donald Trump is the guy who, is going on random tangents. Donald Trump is the guy who looks kind of confused up there. And we can make the race about that as compared to not being able to ever mention that because frankly, Joe Biden is worse when it comes to all of that.
Well, in making this race about California and the potential of a Harris topping a ticket, how important is that for California? Because in the last 2 years, we've lost both majority leaders in the Republican and Democratic Party in the U.S. House. Then also Dianne Feinstein, a trailblazer in the Senate, has passed away, and a figurehead there. What would it mean to have someone from California really feeling like they're leading the presidential ticket and perhaps being the next president of the United States?
We've never had a Democratic president from California. Of course, we have Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan, Republican presidents. You can visit their libraries. It would be huge. It would be huge. I mean, Kamala Harris is somebody I've known for over 20 years, somebody that is so well known by everybody in this state. She would bring the perspective of that. Doug Emhoff, somebody who's a Southern Californian, her husband as well. You would get it would really be a benefit for the state, not only in terms of federal funding but also just in terms of her worldview. I mean, I've talked about it even recently in the last few months with the vice president that's where she's trained. That's where her whole experience is. What's formed her thinking is the California lifestyle. And so it would be a significant thing. But it would also be interesting to see if there actually is an open convention, which is hard to imagine, but wouldn't it be exciting? Because I'd love to cover it, and I'm sure you would too. With the California delegation, if it had to choose between Newsom and Harris, what do they choose? How does that split? That would be really interesting to see as well. If Newsom even would challenge her, there's I think, a scenario where he bows out and doesn't challenge her, even though everybody assumes that he would, because he maybe thinks he can't win and because he doesn't want to get in the way of the first female Black president.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing to note there too, is that not only is Harris that next is the top contender, it would seem that next one up is Newsom, and of course there's that difficulty of whether or not financially how that would work with campaign finance and being able to provide all the money for that part of the ticket. But no, thank you so much for joining us today. And to a reminder for our viewers, the issue is on Bakersfield KBFX Fox 58 Sundays at 6 a.m. You can also watch it on foxla.com. /shows/ the issue is, and on Apple Podcasts, and there's other ways to watch it as well. But thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, and the issue is this week is all about the Republican convention. So we spent the entire week going behind the scenes talking to all the top people, including the California delegation, about many of the issues you were just talking about there, their insights and analysis. It's one of our best shows ever. Worked really hard on it. We hope people will check it out. And thank you, Will, for your continued great work. You represent us well. I love seeing your stuff, and thanks for including me in this.
Absolutely. Thank you for making time, and enjoy, if you can, any parts of Wisconsin. You've been working so hard.
I'd rather take a nap, but thank you.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Nice. I